Welcome to the Martin Bailey Photography Podcast. It's May 11, 2020, and this is episode 704. Following on from last week, here is the second part of my conversation with my good friend Nick Kitto. As we continue our conversation, we get into talking about the 10 images that Nick had sent me, and you can see them all in an album on the blog at mbp.ac/704. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conversation. So as we're talking about the photographs, let's jump in and take a look at these. Some of them are more like, for example, the first one. This is a very young Nick. Was this the back in '96 that you'd said earlier?
Yeah, this was 4th of December, 1997. This was the second. This was the country club. So
okay.
That was my father's second challenge. God, I was happy to get that. I was slightly chubbier then as well. Certainly got a bit more hair. That's true.
Well, let's just talk a little bit about these. You've obviously gone there. We've talked about the experience. It's really nice to actually see the clubhouse and everything. So the cars, who were they? The people that were living there? Well, not living there, but where the caretaker and stuff. Yeah,
in 1997, it was all closed, which is why when we went there in 2004, it was mainly the thing that was open was the old dining room, and in 2002 actually I was on a business trip to Beijing, and I nipped down on a Friday afternoon for a quick look, and it was Friday afternoon in January 2002. There was a tea party, traditional dancing and snacks and teas, and it was great fun. And I was the only foreigner. Of course, no one took any notice of me. I just sat there and took in the atmosphere, and certainly that would take place. If you see the building behind me, the top floor was the main dance area and main dining area and everything. And that's where I went in. I couldn't access it at all. I was too excited to find it. I didn't even try to access it in 1997. But in 2002, I went in, and there was a tea party, and there wasn't much going on because I went downstairs and it was all closed off, and I didn't have a torch or anything, but I could just make out that it was pretty dirty. In fact, it was unchanged when we went there 2004, 7 years, more than 2 years later. It was clear that nothing had happened there since. But then I've talked about the time we had with my father there, but then in 2010, now with some of the bigger ports, Robert really just needed, for the purposes of the book, he needed to go to visit each of the ports we went to, and we saw a lot, at least 50. But some of the bigger ones, I really needed to go back because he got the feel for the place to be able to write about it. But I needed to go back because there were a lot of buildings, and it's much easier if I went back. And quite often I would be joined for those return trips by our good friend John Kennell, JC.
Okay, yeah. And
he actually, as coincidence would have it, was present in quite a few of the photos that I have here. And not in 2000, I think it's 2014. 2014. I went back to Tianjin and went back to the country club, and it had just been restored. And you can see I have two photographs. One of which is a panorama, which gives you a bit more of the scope of the building.
And the new building, the tower in the left corner, yeah.
Yeah. And then there's it's all been beautifully restored, and I've also included a close-up, so you can, certainly, if for those that get the download that you offer, you'll be able to zoom in and see the brickwork. I mean, it's terrific. It's been beautifully restored, and of course, there's no point going on about it too much, but the internal side, as you've seen in the book, was fantastic.
Yeah.
They've changed the interior a little bit to make it more practical.
I see.
But the swimming pool is beautiful.
Yeah.
The bowling alley is beautiful. The squash court is a squash court again.
Yeah.
And it's a private club once again.
Yeah, it was great looking through those images.
So that was 2014.
Wow.
I think we've covered the club. Do you want to talk about do you want me to just go through some of these photographs?
Yeah, or the next one in number 2, the Tianjin Astor Hotel. This is an amazing building. Tell us about this.
This is fantastic. Oh, I get really excited about this building. Tianjin became a treaty port after the Second Opium War, in around, let's call it 1860, in effect. And 1863, the first hotel was built by a missionary, suitably called Mr. or Reverend John Innocent. That's a good name for a missionary.
Yeah.
And his first effort was a bit sort of second class, because it was generally called the Mud House rather than the Astor Hotel. But the demand was high, and Tianjin was kind of the trading port for Beijing, the capital. And it very quickly, Shanghai became by far the largest treaty port, but Tianjin and another one, Hankow, and became the next two biggest probably. Tianjin was better known for its, there was a lot of trade, of course, but it was better known for its finances. There were a lot of banks in Tianjin. So there was demand for hotels. And I think I actually have a book on the whole history of the Astor Hotel, and I've been a bit lazy. I haven't checked the exact dates, but soon after the 1885 or 1886, it was rebuilt into the form you see now. Now, what the bit I'm talking about now is essentially the tower and the wooden parts that you can see.
Yeah. Because
later on in again, I don't know, I won't hesitate to guess, but it would be the early-ish 1900s, maybe 1920s. There's a concrete extension that is just on the far left of the building, and that had one of the first elevators in China, if not the first elevator, because there was a lot of competition between Tianjin and Shanghai, who was going to be first for this, that, and the other. Shanghai probably edged it, but Tianjin had a lot of firsts. And then you can see behind it, there's a more modern block now. 2 blocks actually. That's part of the hotel complex. It takes up a whole block now, and that includes offices. There's so-called modern hotel rooms. The entrance to the hotel is around that side. Now, when Robert and I went there in 2007, we stayed in the Astor Hotel, but that was before it was restored. It was, a lot of it had been concreted over just to make it more functional. The new bit had existed, and we were ushered into a room there. We said, "Oh, no, excuse me, we want to go into the old bit." It was wonderful walking around the old corridors, because that had been part of that original building, whether it was in late 19th century when it was built. It was still there. The old staircases were there, and it was lovely. The rooms were a bit basic, but they were en suite, and it was a lovely experience. But then they restored it in 2010, and since then, every time I go to Tianjin, I stay in that hotel. Robert and I stayed in it because we came back, because if you remember, 2007 was our exploratory trip. So we came back after 2010. Oh, it was terrific. Now, what I should say is that from 1903, there was an owner who was the majority shareholder, was a fellow called William O'Hara, and he managed the hotel, and from 1903, and he improved it, and he was responsible for the extension. And come the Second World War, he was interned, like all foreign non-combatants were. When he got out of the internment camp in 1945, it had been used, of course, but for military use, as a real mess. And he spent every last penny he had restoring it.
Oh, I see.
And it, like most expats of the era, pre-war era, they all thought that after the war everything would go back to normal. Well, one thing had changed is that in 1943, of course, all Britain signed a treaty handing back cancelling out all of the former treaties. So these were no longer treaty ports. These were very much Chinese, rightly back in Chinese hands. And so, but of course, what really derailed everything was in 1949 and the Civil War. And Tianjin was captured fairly early on by the communist troops, and they took over all the cities, of course, and they put their own system in. And O'Hara was presented with, he's basically said, look, sorry, you can't have this hotel, but it's my hotel. All right, we will, there's a lot of back taxes that you owe us since the first day of the treaty port, in effect, because you were renting our land. So we want the rent and the back taxes on this hotel. Of course, he couldn't pay it, which was the whole objective. And poor old William O'Hara, he left in 1949 and virtually penniless. He went, and more importantly, is absolutely brokenhearted. And he went to New Zealand, and he probably didn't live much longer. But again, it's, as I said, there's always the family connection comes to light in China. It's wonderful. In the renovation, when it was completed in 2010, they renamed the bar there O'Hara's Bar. So his name was back, and so I thought that was a lovely touch.
Brilliant.
So there you have, and it's a beautiful hotel to stay in. But listeners, if you go to Tianjin, stay in the Astor Hotel, and for goodness sake, ask to be put in the old part.
That's brilliant. Great advice from someone who's got first-hand experience. That's what I like. So
now,
go ahead. Sorry.
No, you carry on.
I was going to say the next image is it's a striking. This is the pagoda. You said it was an old bandstand. Tell us about this. This is a beautiful shot, beautiful structure.
Opposite the Astor Hotel, literally, I was kind of almost on the corner of it, but in front of the old building was a small park called Victoria Park. And the other thing I should say is that a lot of things don't change. Once a park, always a park. Once a custom house, always a custom house. A lot of things don't change. The buildings get put to different uses, but hotels generally stay hotels. Parks generally stay parks. And in this, my father remembers this park a lot because he would be taken to it quite often by his nanny or his parents. And there was a bandstand, which, of course, being in China, was a Chinese-style pavilion. And that has survived. And again, as part of the whole restoration that's going on in Tianjin, which is absolutely amazing. It's not just this hotel, that's one good example, but virtually every old building's been addressed. And this was restored, and it's not so much to look at from the outside, but of course the roof, the ceiling, the inside. Wow, that was, I had to take a photograph of that. And of course, as I've told you, I was hand holding my photographs here, so it was kind of tricky. So I wanted depth of field, and you can probably just see, if you really blow up the photo, that it's starting to drop out at the rear. But anyway,
that's fine.
I ramped up. This was on by this time I was on the 5D Mark II. I went up to 800 ISO, f7.1. Of course, I would have preferred something, but that gave me a 1/80th
Yeah.
shutter speed, which was just about doable.
Yeah.
And of course, then it was a question of trying to get it lined up properly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, we got there of sorts.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. It's in the book as well, of course, and it was one of the images that stood out. I think it's also used in the marketing material on the website.
Yeah.
I mean that. Yes. So it's a beautiful, striking image, and the artwork, of course, is absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, marvelous, wonderful. I mean, this and the. Okay, you've got the last three photos I've talked about. Really, it's not. They're all in Tianjin, but it's not just Tianjin. It's as I said in my notes. It's every city has something.
Yeah.
Of varying degrees, and it's what they've done is amazing, because the quality of the restorations are terrific.
Yeah. Well, the next image, you've got that one in I'm going to say Qingdao because that's the only way I know how to say it.
Yeah.
But that's an amazing building. I mean, the one with the yellow walls and the rustic sort of, the orange roof. Tell us about this.
Yeah, this was Qingdao was, and the main country of influence in Shandong province was Germany, and Germany had been left behind France and well, certainly left behind Britain, and the Kaiser was itching to get something. It was terrible. I mean, Robert Vickers, who wrote the foreword to the book, has got a number of books, and one of his books is called The Scramble for China, because that's what it was. It was really ludicrous, and poor old China was being cut up like a cake. Indeed, there's a cartoon that depicts some of the Western powers cutting China up like a cake.
Wow.
So the Kaiser finally found an excuse. Two of his missionaries, I think it was two, were murdered miles away, albeit just within the border of Shandong province, were murdered. So that was it. He told his people in Shanghai, send in some Marines. We've got to take some place. These people, our missionaries, have been murdered. There's two of them. And so a force of German Marines landed at Qingdao, which was nothing. It was a small fishing village. The local commander of the imperial troops thought this was an official visit. So he had all of his troops lined up in a welcome.
Oh.
And poor chap the commander says, right, you've got 2 days to vacate. And so he prudently left. And anyway, that resulted in a German treaty. And they got a lot of mining rights. They got the rights to build a railway from Qingdao to Jinan, which is the provincial capital. But Germany basically took that over in 1898, and they had a clean board. There was nothing there. So in true Germanic fashion, they very quickly, very efficiently, with health as well, they lined up things so it was facing prevailing winds. They had the industrial area there north, they had residential down south, they had shops in the middle, they had businesses in the middle, and a bit to the north it was all very nicely planned. And of course the governor, as was the case with the British consuls as well, he made very sure that he had a nice house to live in. This is the governor's mansion. Now, to be fair to him, it's impressive, but equally impressive was his city hall, which is in the book, but not pictured here.
Yeah.
It took him several years to build this, and he blew his budget big time. But the detail, I mean, it's classic. Again, for those that can blow up the picture, you can see it's classic German style, and the intricate carvings and everything on it. It's actually amazing. And inside, it's unchanged. Now, in 1914, of course, the European War started, and China was neutral at least until 1917, when it officially join the Allies. But Japan, with the British help, basically conquered, evicted the Germans. It was quite a nasty war, but little damage was done to the. It was short, shall we say, short and sharp, and the Germans were out, and it became more of an international city. And this property was used as a guest house until around 1934.
Yeah.
And after the Civil War, after 1949, it still was used as a guest house. And Mao Zedong used to stay there quite often. He liked to stay there often, which is probably why the interior and some of the intricate, it's almost certainly why the interior and some of the intricate carvings survived the Cultural Revolution.
Wow.
But it's really interesting inside because, again, it's been turned into a museum, and they've put a lot of the old furniture and stuff that was there is back there.
Wow, amazing.
Qingdao is another city that's been beautifully restored.
Yeah.
Again, Martin, a lot of the advantage of this is that rather than knocking down the old, when they wanted to expand, they build a new city to the north or to the east or to the west. So the old cities have maintained their old buildings, whereas there's a modern city just next door.
Yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? It's great that they've done that. Brilliant. So the next one, you have the Jinan St. Joseph's Cathedral. This, again, beautiful, very intricate artwork. Tell us about this shot.
Yeah, this cathedral survived the Cultural Revolution. Again, not visible here, but in the book, you can see it's quite a complicated building. It's got a lot of the seminary and so on is attached to it. And we were fortunate because it was closed, but again, the caretaker let us in. And it's used. It's now back as being used as a church. And again, it was used as a sandpaper factory in the 1960s. So again, possibly because it was being used for manufacturing purposes. Again, it was pretty much ignored during the Cultural Revolution. And I'm sorry I keep going on about it, but once more, just look at that. Well, I call it the ceiling. There's probably a religious name for it, but the ceiling is fantastic. I lay down on my back to take that shot. Again, I ramped up the old ISO for those that are interested, up to 6,400 F5. Nice. And I was on the cusp there, 1/30th. It was 31.
Yeah.
But we made it.
But with the camera resting on your face, it's a bit of a support, right?
Exactly. If I'd been standing up, no way.
Yeah.
Landing with myself on my back, it was doable.
Yeah. Brilliant. It's beautiful. So let me move on to the next one. What have we got here? The Shanghai Bund.
Yes. Now I've done that rather than just picking on a building, because again, what they've done there is when Robert and I were there, and I think we did Shanghai. He and I did Shanghai. I've been back several times, often with JC, and this was actually taken more recently with JC. When Robert and I were there in 2008, there was 8 lanes of road, and the walkway was about quarter of that. The rest of it was all road.
Wow.
So traffic going in 4 lanes one direction, 4 lanes the other. In 2012, I think it was, Shanghai was due to host the forgot what it's called now, but I'll come back. Anyway, it was Shanghai did a big renovation project, and part of this was to put the road underneath the road, so that the road is now being reduced to one-way 4 lanes, and the road going in the other direction is underneath it.
Wow.
And they've turned the space into this amazing walkway. I mean, I really wish Hong Kong would do something like this.
Yeah.
It's terrific.
Wow.
And it goes all the way. It goes a very long way from the north part of the old treaty port all the way down past the old city of Shanghai. And it's such a lovely walk. And just to touch on the buildings that are visible in the two closest, the nearest one, the dome, is the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank.
I see.
Which is a magnificent building. Again, all the buildings along the Bund and around, a lot of them around China, around Shanghai, were restored for this event. And the one next to it, with the clock tower, is the Custom House, and it's still the Custom House. Both those buildings are in their second existence because they were quite small to begin with, and they were rebuilt in the early 1900s, and so and that's the walkway.
That's amazing. That's such good city planning, isn't it? The way they've done that with the road and everything.
Which is what you can do. I mean, I hate to say this, but you try doing something like that in a democracy, and it becomes quite difficult. And you can do it very easily in the situation we have in China.
Yeah, I suppose it's a double-edged sword, but the results are stunning.
Yeah, no, I know it is a double-edged sword, and of course the thing that the second airport, Beijing, is being replaced by a third one. From planning to completion and opening took 4 years. Now, Britain has been talking about third runway at Heathrow for 25 years or something.
Yeah. Wow.
But anyway, there's more to it, of course, than that.
So what's this next building? The Shanghai Hazelwood.
Yes, that's the Taipan that Butterfield and Swire was arrived in 1865. They were originally from north of England, Liverpool, based in Liverpool, or at least the Swire part was, and they were into cotton trading and very big in that. And they arrived quite late in the treaty port, but what sent them in that direction was because of the American Civil War closed down what had been a big market in cotton for them, or both supply and demand. And so they were quite active they were looking at Australia, and on their way to Australia, they sort of popped up to have a look at China. And John Swire was a great entrepreneur, and he could see opportunities in China, and they arrived, and they soon became very big, and started in shipping. They were very canny with what they would take on their ships. I hasten to add they weren't involved in the opium trade at all. So they became one of the big. So there was Jardine Matheson, there was various other companies, and there was certainly Butterfield and Swire were very big traders. And by then they were into manufacturing. Jardine's was long since left the drug trade and were in manufacturing and shipping and everything. They became Jardine's and Swire became quite active competitors. And with a Chinese shipping company, there were basically 3 shipping companies, the big shipping companies in China at that time, and Swire was one of them. So this was their second version of Hazelwood in a different place, and they actually had a compound, and they had other accommodation, but this is by far the most impressive building. They had other accommodation in the same compound. This building was finished in 1934, and it was designed by a very famous Welsh architect, Sir Bertram Clough Williams Ellis, who might be better known for Portimerion, which is an Italian village built in Wales, North Wales, which itself became famous when there was a TV program that probably precedes you, Martin, although you've probably heard of it, called The Prisoner. Which is okay.
I've heard of it and don't recall any details.
It was set in that village. Now, this architect never actually visited China, but he built 3 or 4 properties in China without actually coming here. This is his most impressive and his biggest, probably his largest contract.
Mm.
And it became the Taipan, the boss, the China sort of boss of, well, in fact, the Butterfield and Swab was run out of London and still is at the time. And so it was the Taipan's residence. The whole compound is now part of a hotel. I've got another long story, which I won't start because I was a bit north. I wasn't staying in the hotel at the time. And so I came up with a ruse because we tried to photograph this building, but we were stopped by security, understandably.
Mm.
But I went in to ask to see the sales director.
Mm.
I had a plan. Briefly, I thought, and when I eventually got to see her, they kept me waiting a long time as a test. I came up with this idea that it would be wonderful to run a photography course in using this compound, using this hotel as a base.
Mm.
And because it had open areas and we could go at dawn, we could bus to the Bund and everything. And so I talked through this with the sales director, and I suddenly realized I had an idea. So it started off as a bluff to get into, and she gave us a tour again.
Yeah.
Busy lady. And of course, as you in the book, you can see the photograph of the roof, the copper roof.
Oh, yeah.
And so she'd taken me up to show me the bedrooms. And luckily, although the windows were sealed, there was a small window that could open. So I stuck my camera out and photographed the roof. And I know it was mischievous to use that ploy to get in, but I've been back since to see her, and I've stayed in the hotel to see her, and she still works there, and I will send her a copy of the book. And I haven't completely given up on that idea, to be honest. But it's just perhaps a bit more than I really want to do nowadays. It's, you know, you do tours, you know, they're quite tough to work. And I think it's probably a great idea, but it won't go any further. So I put that in there partly because I was a bit mischievous in getting there, but also because it's a lovely building.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Let's take a look at the next one. What have we got here? So the British consul's residence.
Now, this is in Gulang, which is a small island off the island of Xiamen that was one of the Amoy, as it was called, was one of the first treaty ports. And this became a treaty port as a result of 1842. But what happened is that Westerners, when they arrived, they realized that the main island was that it was quite unhygienic, and so they decamped for their residences to the small island of Gulang. And this is there is a family connection with this one, because this is the British consul's residence. It was finished in around 1847-48. It was a two-story property. The top story was made of wood. No sooner had it been finished that a typhoon came along and blew off the top story. So as the consul had already blown his budget seriously, I mean, he'd gone way over. The actual consulate was about a quarter of the size of this residence. He thought prudently to make it a single-story building. And one of my relatives actually served as British consul in Gulang for a short time.
Brilliant.
So what I did, what happened is that when Robert and I went there earlier, it was locked off. We could see the side of the building, but we couldn't, and all I could get was a small shot of its corner of the colonnade, and that's what we thought we were going to have to live with. But I went back again with JC, and just at that time, the Gulang office was applying to make it a World Heritage Site, and the old British consulate held the office of you know the island's authorities were housed in that office. So on whim, I went in and I explained that it was actually a great uncle, but I kept it simple and said my great grandfather was consul here, and could I possibly go in and have a look? And the director, to his credit, said, "Oh, okay." And so two of his chaps, well, very nice people. One was his official translator, and another was a historian. And of course, they told me about how they were applying for World Heritage. So I think I was, again, the family bit was important.
Yeah.
But the World Heritage application probably swung it.
Yeah.
Now, I've always shared, once I got this photo, I shared my photos with them and the old photos I had, which I got from Kew. And also, I should say that although I was mischievous in getting to photograph Hazelwood, I gave all the photos, not just of Hazelwood, but of all the other buildings. I did give the sales director, Nora is her name, a copy of for use in case they wanted to use it. So I kind of,
you make up for it.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
So we got into the grounds. Of course, we've got we had a group photo and everything. And I spent a lot of time getting old photographs of them. I haven't been back since it's been a World Heritage Site, but I'm hopeful that they've used some of the photos that I provided.
Oh, brilliant. So next you have the custom house that you've got on the cover of Trading Places. You're going to tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite buildings.
It's beautiful.
This was one of the first I photographed. In these days, this was the end of 2008. I was using a tripod shortly after we abandoned it because it was just slowing us down too much. Now, this was built in 1914. There was a previous custom house that was destroyed by a fire in 1912. It also took out the general post office that was next door, and so they rebuilt it. This wasn't actually this was in Guangzhou proper, next to the settlement area, if you like. But and I put it there because it's the cover of the book, and it's because it's such a lovely building. Again, I hate to go on about it, but look at the detail of
absolutely,
the restoration.
Yeah,
and it's still a custom house customs property.
Yeah.
It's actually used as a museum. Unfortunately, it's kind of odd. It keeps odd hours, so every time I've been back, it's not been opened because I'd quite like to go in, but it's rightly on the cover, I think.
It's a beautiful building. Absolutely. Okay, what's this? Let's take a look at the last one that you have.
Now, this is way down south in Pakhoi.
Yeah, the Beihai British Consulate.
It's called Beihai. It was called Pakhoi. And again, it was a city that it was easy to win promotion in because plague was endemic in the 1800s, and of course the local population had already had some degree of protection against that sort of thing. But it was the first British consulate, his living quarters and his office was a shack that was on stilts over the sea and next to other shacks used by fishing. And again, in the book, there's one of the consuls actually drew a picture of his living quarters, which I've reproduced 2 of the 6 drawings he did. But in 1885, sort of 10 years. Oh, sorry, that was in 1885. It was a shack. 1877. Finally, the British government or the consular authorities approved a new consulate. And I put this one in because in 1999, the city authorities wanted to put a dual carriageway to improve transport and everything. And this building was stuck in the middle of it. So they've done this with several other buildings, well, certainly a few other buildings, and they lifted up on stilts,
Wow.
on rails,
Yeah.
and moved it. I think the exact distance was 55.8 meters
Wow.
out of the way and into the grounds of a school where it now resides.
Oh,
And
brilliant.
this is your kind of your classic style, building style. A lot of the consulates, the British consulates, were designed like this. Of course, as you can see in the one before of the residence, they've covered in some of the in this case, they haven't covered in the colonnades, so you can see that's exactly how it was. But it's typical style of the British built for their consulates.
Wow. Yeah. Brilliant.
So that's the reason why I put that in for that purpose.
Yeah. Oh, it's absolutely lovely looking through these with you as well. So let's thanks for sharing those stories with us. Let's jump back and tell us a little bit about getting the book published. How difficult was it to get this book published, or was it really easy?
No, it wasn't. As always with Nick Kitto, there's a long story, but I'm aware of the time. I anticipate some fairly ferocious editing to go on.
No.
My first publisher was going to be the same publisher as Robert used for his book, China's Foreign Places, that came out in around this time, 5 years ago, almost to the day, I think. Well, a little bit later, May. Oh yeah, around this time it came out. I wasn't quite ready. I got approval in principle from the publisher of the official publisher. But fortunately, at the time, the original publisher had retired, and he was acting publisher. And I thought he was a jolly good chap because he gave me approval in principle. But I wasn't finished because it was 2015. I still had quite a lot to photograph, particularly in Shanghai and other places. By the time I was ready, in early mid 2000, a year later, the publisher had changed. The individual responsible had changed, and he was no longer interested, as he put it to me, or as one of his staff put it to me. We don't do color photographs anymore. That's the wrong accent. But anyway, so I was then left without a publisher, which with hindsight, I don't really need one. Didn't really need one, although I didn't know that until later. But by then I was working with the Photographic Heritage Foundation, a chap called Ed Stokes, and he is a very experienced photographer and publisher and co-publisher, I should say. And he introduced me to my second publisher, who they took a bit of time. I think they were probably trying to assess whether it's a book that they really wanted to do or whether they should do, because it was kind of outside of their normal thing, a color photography book. Of course, I made it clear that I would help with the finances. But that dragged on. Oh my goodness. And finally, so what I did was, as I wrote everything, I got agreement in principle, and they liked the layout, the sort of approach I was taking. And so I got on with the writing and the choosing of the photographs. I then asked them, do you have an editor to edit my script? And they said, no, not in English. So I got my own editor, which I wanted to do anyway, because I knew exactly who I wanted to do, and she did an excellent job. I then did that. So I then cut down my short list to about 800 photographs, which is hardly a short list. And they said, okay. I said, right, I have a designer in mind, because again, Ed Stokes had introduced me. Well, he'd introduced me to I knew the editor through Robert, but he'd introduced me to the publisher, and now he'd also introduced me to the designer that we use with the foundation. And they said, oh, we should let us have a go. And so they had a go, and it wasn't what I wanted. There was a lot of white space. There was a lot of blank space, and they did the shortest chapter, and it still took them quite a while. And so I said, well, would you mind if I do my own design? And they said, no. So I went to see Colin Tillier of Graphic Cat, and he did Nick, I'll do the first chapter. And it was absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
It was exactly what I wanted.
Brilliant.
And unbelievably, he managed to get in nearly all of those 800 photographs. I think something like 747 of them.
Wow.
It's just, and plus about 30 or 40 others that, there's a few old photographs in there that I put in.
I thought the one of your grandparents at their wedding, is it? That's absolutely beautiful. The fact that you've put that in there, but the photo as well with the huge smile on their faces and stuff.
Yeah,
brilliant.
And I was a bit nervous about that because I was a bit worried. I've avoided the family connection. Really,
I think it's a nice touch. I can understand why you would think about that, but to me, it was one of the first things that, apart from the fact that it's a stunning publication, that was when I really started I could feel a smile developing on my face just looking at it, and the fact that you went into that sort of facet of your history and included the photos. To me, it was a very nice touch. So I don't think.
Well, that's exactly what Colin said. He said, look, you've not, it is driven by the family, because I'm certainly not going to touch on my family stuff in detail now, I can assure you, but it was that, because I learned so much when I knew nothing, we knew nothing. And my grandfather came to live with us, and I used to drive him around soon after I got my driving license. I never thought to ask him about his time in China. Not even my father. He remembered stuff, and bless him, he wrote it down. But we knew nothing about my grandmother, his mother's family. And it's amazing what I found out. Thanks to David Oakley, who sadly is no longer with us, because I met him when we visited Taiwan to photograph the buildings in Taiwan. But thanks to him, he got me going. Anyway.
Brilliant.
And so I'm glad to hear that you think it was important, because Colin said the same thing. And he said, no, it needs to be there.
I think that it's a personal touch that is, it's an inkling into why. I know that we've touched on a lot of it. People who've listened to this already have a lot of these details. But to me, when I first picked up the book, I wasn't even aware that you had those ties, those connections back then. I was thinking that you were born in the Isle of Man, probably, because I know that's where your family are. And I was thinking that you'd probably just got a job. Oops, banging my mic. You'd got a job. I was aware that you'd been to Nairobi as well. And I was thinking you'd got a job in Hong Kong and you went, and that was the first contact. So I didn't know that you'd got all of this history with China and everything. And that is a wonderful insight and into why you've got the interest. And just listening to you today, talking through all of the history, it's your family was part of that history. And that is why it's also interesting to listen to. And I just so that you know, I'm not going to edit out any of the stories. If people find it boring, they can fast forward. I've really enjoyed talking with you about all of this. So I hope that some of the listeners do as well. But I wanted to. Scott, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I haven't finished. Inevitably, with me, Martin, I haven't finished answering your question about the publisher.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Having been through all of this, I then went to the second publisher and finally discussed terms. And by now, of course, I'd done everything and I'd financed everything. And I was and I'd also chosen the printer, because I didn't want anyone to print it. I wanted someone that Colin knew to be a good printer and who he could work with, because he was going to supervise the printing as well. Because as you can see, there's a lot of spreads, photographic spreads, and you know how the printing process works. And trying to there'll be one half of the photo in a completely different page, and getting those colors matched. So by then, all I was missing was a distributor. And of course, Robert, typical humorist, said, "Oh, buy a couple of Toyota vans and then you can do your own distribution." I didn't want to do that. But then the second publisher, terms were, considering what I'd done, were difficult for me to accept. And we left as good friends. And of course, I've sent him a copy of the book. And I hope I'll be able to do something with him since. I then sought distributors. And in that process, I was introduced to Pete Spurrier, who runs a small publishing house called Blacksmith Books. And I will be eternally grateful to Pete, because I went to him to talk about distributing, because he's got a global network. And he said, yeah, sure, no problem. And I said, well, what do you want to see? Oh, not much. Show me it looks great. It looks great. Nick. It looks great. And then I kind of looked at his website, and I looked at all the books he published, and he's got some lovely books there. And he's also got a treaty port author who has one or two books of his with him, called Paul French, and who's a well-known in the treaty port side. And I then sent him an email, and I said, forgive me if I'm being a bit cheeky, but would it be easier if you were the publisher as well? He said, yeah, no problem. Sure, I'll put my name on it. Now, Pete hadn't really seen much. He doesn't know me well. And it was informal. And as I say, I will be eternally grateful for him. And he's really good. He's been, he's given me some great, we're doing marketing ideas jointly, and he's got great ideas what I should do and who to touch base with. And so that was how I ended up with Blacksmith Books. And
so it was far from an easy process.
No, is it ever with me?
Yeah.
But I've learned, the other thing I've been doing in between this is I started I felt I had to do something for Hong Kong, so I started photographing declared monuments. And it took me ages to get introduced to find the right people. I knew the people, but they didn't know me, and I'd send emails, and the Commissioner of Heritage, for example. But then the great thing about Hong Kong, you always know somebody who knows the person you want to get to talk to. And I got in touch with the Commissioner of Heritage, and by now I'd given up. Originally, I was going to be a professional photographer, and I was going to sell my photographs, but I was so besotted with these buildings and everything, and I wanted to do a bit of payback. It sounds a bit, cocky or whatever but as my career in the accounting thing has enabled me to retire early and concentrate on the photography and the subject matter that I really enjoy, and so I'm forever grateful to Hong Kong for that.
It's brilliant.
So I've persevered with both the declared monuments, and I've had some great breaks in both at the end of the day. And that's, if you've got something you really enjoy doing, don't give up. It's simple. Yeah. But of course, it helps.
That's very much, I can completely understand that. And that's kind of, as I was saying earlier, with you doing the wildlife work in Nairobi, it's what you were interested in. Your drive was your passion for the subject matter. And it's obvious that you've been incredibly passionate about this project. It's great to actually see a physical book. I've got it on my desk in front of me now. And I've got to admit, there were times when I was thinking, that book's never going to materialize. But knowing that, it's pretty much the first thing you've mentioned every time we've met or spoken. And it was obvious that the passion was there, and it's come to fruition. You've got it. It's a beautiful. I think it's an important, not only an important historical piece, but photographically, but it's also, just the production quality and the printing. As someone who is very heavily into printing and reproducing images, on paper, I've got to say it's one of the best, the most highest quality printing that I've seen. So all of the sourcing that you've done for that, and the work that you've put into it, it's all paid off. So congratulations. And
thank you, Martin. It's very kind of you to say that. And I particularly liked your comments about the family. I had still not, I'm comfortable now, put it that way.
It's brilliant. So where can people go to find it? If anyone wants to order a copy, where can they go?
Well, that, of course, is the major challenge. I mean, we are, that it will end up in North America quite soon. It's a big distributor there, National Book Network, and they run a kind of a conveyor belt, and you first get on the conveyor belt by getting into a catalog. But of course, they're doing their catalogs quite in advance. I think we're in the winter catalog, which means they'll be asking to send books to them fairly soon, but not immediately. And North America, I think, particularly Canada, where a lot of expats from these China days ended up retiring, would be quite a good market. The Book Depository has a countdown running for the UK, but I know that not a large number of books were sent there. So that will probably run out. But then, of course, there's no airmail service to the UK at the moment. Hopefully that'll change soon. It's available online from the publisher, and it's a notional charge for mailing, frankly, because it's 3 kilos. We'd never sell a book if we charged the full amount. So it's a relatively notional charge for mailing. But of course, it would take time to get there.
At the moment. Well, it's worth the wait. I have a couple of links. I know that you've put a website together where people can go through to the publishers and buy it. So I'll drop some links into the show notes. Do you have any way that people could connect with you online?
I'm not very good at that. I had a Facebook page, but I just found, I think if Apple had done it, it would have been far more intuitive. I just find it far too complicated.
Yeah.
My daughter, bless her, who's an expert in these things, has revitalized my Instagram account. So she's putting up, perhaps not as fast as I would like, but then I'm very, very impatient. But she's putting up images quite recent, every other day or so on Instagram. And you're going to ask, I stopped talking then because you're going to ask me for the address. I don't really know, but
send me the address. I'll put that to you. I'll put that into the links. Well, I'll tell you what, let's do this. I'll send you a link to the post. If anyone wants to ask you any questions about the book, just put it into the blog post and then you can reply there.
Okay.
Nick, I think we'll probably wrap up at that point. We've been running for almost 2 hours. I might split this into 2 parts so that people can listen to it in under our series. So. But still, I've really enjoyed it. It's been fascinating listening to you talk about your history and how the book came to be. And so thank you very much for your time. And once again, congratulations on the book. And hopefully we'll get a chance to catch up again pretty soon.
Yeah, Martin, thanks very much. It's always a joy to speak to you.
Not at all.
And I'm hopefully the Namibia trip will go ahead next year. So
I'm working on, it's all going to be, if it's possible to do, we'll do it. If it's not possible, we may have to move it out a year, but we'll get back there. And I'm looking forward to traveling with you again when we can.
Okay, Martin. Take care.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Nick Kitto. I have gotten Nick's Instagram address, it's basically NJ Kitto, and it's 2 T's, Kitto. And I've put that into the show notes as well. Everything is at mbp.ac/704. Thanks very much for listening today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share a link with your friends. Subscribe in iTunes or your favorite podcast program to ensure uninterrupted delivery. If you have a moment to rate the podcast or leave us a review in iTunes, that helps to keep us relevant in the huge number of podcasts out there now. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn, and links to everything that I'm up to are at martinbaileyphotography.com, so do drop by and take a look. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, you take care and have a great week, whatever you're doing. Bye bye.